Hi, William here again, and thank you for joining me for this week's project video. Now, a few months ago, if you remember correctly, I turned this partly on my lathe and partly on the router lathe. This project, which I called Twisted, is in fact a fluted vase where the flutes went all the way through, and I filled them with alternating epoxy resin which were tinted gold and blue. Now this week I thought I would build up on this quite successful project with a second attempt, and I'm going to call it the Twisted Sister. What's Twisted Sister going to be? Well, the flutes on this particular project were 1/2 inch. This time I'm going to make the flutes much thinner. They're going to be 3.2 millimeters instead of 12.7 millimeters. There will be many more of them, and when I've done them one side, I'm going to turn the project round in the router lathe and do the other side. So I'll end up with a kind of fishnet type effect. Now, because the router lathe is really meant for turning things like table legs, it assumes you're going to have quite a lot of play at either end. So there's actually quite a narrow section where you can actually use the router. So you do need quite a big chunk of wood to start off with, but to reduce this, I'm going to make up the spindle using a couple of waste bits of English walnut glued to the end, and then I can part it off and of course use all these other bits again. Okay, so I've mounted the piece of spalted beech between these two waste blocks. This might seem excessively long, but in fact there is limited travel on this carriage. And considering you need quite a lot of waste at the headstock end here, we need to be able to turn this round and work on the same piece. So the next thing I'm going to do is just to work out where the workable area is, and hopefully it will be approximately the same length as the twisted vase that I did before. Now that's set the length of the piece, which is fixed, so I can lock the tailstock in position. So the length of the tailstock then is from the end from here. So I have to make here I'm just adding some tape to delineate the limits of the router. Here I'm just tightening the stops, which stops the, or rather restricts the router movement travel. Here I'm just setting the depth of cut on the router. I want about a 3 to 4 millimeter cut to take into account any eccentricity that's going to occur when I remount it on the lathe. Now I want 12 flutes cutting on this particular project, and there are 24 steps on the index plate, so I'm moving it 2 stops each turn. Okay, having completed the 12 flutes, I've turned it around, and guess what? The flutes are in fact in the same orientation, so actually I can't make the crisscross pattern. So there goes my fishnet theme, and instead I'm going to have to settle for a continuous spiral. Now, to actually make the flutes in a crisscross pattern, I would in fact need to either reverse the direction of the carriage or reverse the direction of the spindle. If anybody's got any ideas how I can do this, I'm really waiting to hear from you. Now, I've mounted this back on the lathe temporarily for a few moments, just to make it easy to remove the debris from the router. I've tried reversing the router before to remove this, and it tends to tear the wood if you go in the opposite direction, so I don't do it. So now I have to fill the 12 flutes with white Milliput. So I've given the Milliput overnight to cure properly, and it's gone rock hard. So now I'm just going to power sand off the most of the excess Milliput using my air sander. Okay, so here I'm going to part off the piece partly with a parting tool and finish it off on the bandsaw, and then remount it in the Colossus jaws. Now, just before I start to hollow this out, I'm going to drill a pilot hole with this 35mm Forstner bit. Okay, to make this hollowing out easy, I'm just going to swing the head through 45 degrees. Now I'm going to start off the excavation of this vase or a pot, whatever you want to call it, using my Simon Hope mini hollowing system. Once I've done as much as I can with the mini hollowing system, I'm moving on to using the two bars from my easy arm hollowing system. Having done as much as I can with that greedy little 6mm cutter, I've moved on to the 23mm scraper. I find that using this semicircular piece of wood with some 150 grain sandpaper actually helps remove the small ridges. Very good. Now I'm going to apply several coats of pre-thinned sanding sealer on this piece, denibbing between each coat. Finally, for expediency, because I need to finish this and get the video out, a few coats of Hampshire sheen lacquer. And then finally, of course, to part it off, finishing off with my gentleman's saw and cleaning up the base. Okay then, so there we have the finished item, the Twisted Sister. Well, at least they were both done on a router lathe and are roughly the same shape and diameter. Well, that didn't turn out as I expected, as I mentioned before, because actually when you turn the project round on the router lathe, the fluting isn't exactly the same orientation. I'll have to think about that. Anyway, I'm not totally disappointed. I think that's quite a nice item. Might have been better if I'd done it in the turquoise Milliput, but I think it's okay. Anyway, I enjoyed it. I hope you did too, and thanks for joining me, and I'll see you again next week.